Hello, Internet. It's Daniel with Driving Dragons, back with a reaction, and this time we are going to Arbiter of Worlds. True Blue reaction on this one. I'm not just reacting to the video itself, but this, I believe, is only like the first or second time I've actually seen a video from Arbiter of Worlds. And I don't rightly recall the first one too much, so I'm reacting to somebody that I have no prior bias going into it all. So let's take a look and see what we've got here when it comes to Arbiter of Worlds. Now, this video is going to be the necessity of simulation for Diegesis in tabletop RPGs.
Welcome to the 31st episode of Arbiter of Worlds. If you're a returning subscriber, thanks for supporting the channel. If you're new to the channel, hello. Here at Arbiter of Worlds, we study the art and science of running and creating tabletop role-playing games. This episode is coming at a special moment for me, because in just a few hours, I'll be launching my crowdfunding campaign for the Adventurer Conqueror King system Imperial Imprint, or Acts 2. In fact, the Kickstarter might be live by the time you watch this. If you enjoy my videos and are an enthusiast for sandbox games, simulation, and player agency, I hope you'll head over to the Kickstarter page and pledge for your copy of Acts 2. The link is in the description below. Last week, we introduced the concept of diegesis in tabletop gaming. Today, we're going to return to the topic of diegesis in the context of player agency. As a refresher, agency is the capacity for human beings to make choices and to impose those choices on the world. In an RPG context, player agency is the capacity for players to make choices and impose those choices by means of their characters in the game world.
All right, that's a fairly good definition that I don't find objectionable at all to player agency. That is actually very refreshing to hear as a definition of player agency, because too often player agency is more or less seen as the ability of players to dictate absolutely everything that happens in the world that may or may not have any influence or impact on their character at all, which is not at all what it is. The ability to make decisions, influence the world. Now, I mispronounced what diegesis, so let's see what this is. But other than that, like I said, that definition I don't find objectionable at all.
Now, it's my belief that in our everyday lives, our real lives, most humans in modern society want agency, but experience an absence of it. In 2023, much of our opportunity for meaningful choice turns out to be illusory. Our daily lives are mostly routine, and our scope of choice is limited by lack of opportunity or resources. Very few people really can impose their will on the world, even in a small way.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. Like, for instance, I mean, he chooses not to get a camera that's less shaky. That would be nice. That's a little distracting, I think. But to be perfectly honest, I get kind of where he's going with this, where he's kind of saying this, like, but to me, this is almost where the concept of player agency meets kind of real world agency situation. You have players out there and people out there in the TTRPG world today, especially the D&D world, who would act like in real life that their agency is being curtailed and their agency is being trampled on because they can't just walk out the door and decide they want to drive a Ferrari to, a room full of beautiful supermodels who do whatever they say, as opposed to having to get in their busted 15-year-old Hyundai Sonata that's knocking on two rods and blow smoke all the way to their dead-end job. But that being said, people have lost the sense of responsibility in this world. And you look back and you find out that 99% of a person's position in life is a direct result of their own decisions, especially as an adult. He's like 99% of the problems in your life, 99% of your position and where you're at is directly related to the series of choices you made to get there. So I would kind of disagree that you don't have that agency. Just because you don't have the agency the ability to make a decision that immediately impacts the world, like say a world leader does not mean that over time your choices do not have effect.
And that creates an emotional void. The agency theory of fun holds that the essence of a tabletop role-playing game is providing the experience of agency to the players. Now, when I say that agency is the essence of RPGs, I'm using essence in its Aristotelian sense as the descriptor of what makes a thing the thing it is. Something's essence is that which is unique and singular to it. For instance, the essence of Homo sapiens is reason. No other animal is as endowed with intelligence as our species. The essence of novels is long-form narrative that enables us to get inside the heads of characters. No other medium can do that the way novels can. The essence of movies is cinematic spectacle that enables us to see and hear sights and sounds that awe, frighten, inspire, or shock us. No other medium can do what movies do as well as movies can. So when I assert that agency is the essence of tabletop RPGs, I'm asserting that no other medium of entertainment can provide agency as effectively. Agency is the killer app of the tabletop RPG.
Actually, I agree with that about 100,000%. That's one of the best takes I've seen on agency in a long time, and the importance of agency in tabletop role-playing games. But agency as it's intended, the true, and this is where things like later editions of Dungeons and Dragons, and in particular 4th and 5th, and where this what I've always called video game mentality that is cropped up in the tabletop role-playing game world has become such an issue. The big difference between a TTRPG and just a video game is that a video game will always be bound and restricted by the limits of the program and the program. The hardware, the memory, the program itself cannot provide you with the scope and level of interactions and choices that a TTRPG can. A TTRPG can provide you beyond real world options. There's nothing you cannot do in a TTRPG, or at least cannot attempt. If I want my character to run off of a building, they can run off of a building. In a video game, they may not be able to run off of the building. There may be the invisible wall, which is really just how the code is set up, that says you don't have any way to jump this 2-foot ledge and fall off the building. So that is, as he said, in essence, in the sense of the core thing that makes it different and makes it tick and work, is that your agency as a player, your ability to basically say, I want to do this and have it narratively work within the story and framework of the game, is truly what sets a tabletop role-playing game apart from other mediums. That is 100% correct.
Because in an RPG, by making choice X, you can impose result Y, and that's the essence of agency. And because tabletop RPGs are an experience that you share with a meaningful social circle of your friends, that result Y becomes meaningful to our lives. Few other hobbies can do that, except a tiny handful of MMOs like EVE. And even there, the agency is heavily constrained by the limits of the video game in a way that it's not in a tabletop RPG. However, despite being the essence of the tabletop RPG, agency is frequently ignored by tabletop RPG designers and game masters. In order to experience agency, the players must be able to make real, not fake, choices that have meaningful consequences on the players and their world. And that, in turn, requires that the game world has an objective existence that can be manipulated by diegetic activity through the mechanism of the rules. And that, in turn, requires a measure of respect for the diegesis. It requires simulationism, which is anathema to many designers and GMs these days. Let me give an example. Imagine that we're playing a game of Call of Cthulhu set in 1933. Sneaking through the restricted vaults of the Miskatonic University Library, one of the player characters has just discovered an ancient grimoire that would greatly assist his party in battling the minions of the Great Old Ones. To make use of the grimoire, however, the PC will need to smuggle it out of the library, which is heavily guarded. So now the player is faced with a choice. Does he have his character attempt to steal the grimoire in order to improve his party's chances in their upcoming fight against evil? If he successfully steals the grimoire, then his party has a good chance of winning the fight. If he decides not to steal the grimoire, then his party has even odds of winning the fight. If he gets caught trying to steal the grimoire, then he'll be arrested and not able to help his party, which will have poor odds of winning its fight. So this is a real choice with real consequences. It's not a railroad where he has to steal the grimoire, nor is it a theme park where the party gets to win even if they lose the fight. Now let's imagine that the player decides that he'll stuff the grimoire under his shirt, cautiously move to the unrestricted area of the library, pick up a number of other books to disguise his excess bulk, and then exit the library, checking out the unimportant books while concealing the grimoire. Good plan. But the GM says, sadly, the grimoire has an RFID chip that you didn't spot. And as you exit the library, the RFID chip wirelessly activates the alarm system. A security guard comes charging at you, so we're going to need to run combat.
Oh, hold on one second here. I'm just going to go ahead and say this. And this may be the point he's about to make. I don't know. An RFID chip in the 1930s? Why? That makes no sense whatsoever. And that just smacks of the game master didn't expect the player to come up with some kind of idea or some kind of way to circumnavigate a problem, and on the spot comes up with a way to make it not work for them. But you wouldn't have an RFID chip in the 1930s. They didn't exist. That may be the point he's about to make, is that you have interfered with that player's agency by basically cheating the world and putting something that he has no reasonable expectation to have in there. And this is going to come back to, as he was saying, manipulate the world through the mechanics of the game. This kind of comes back to one of those things that I say on the homebrew Rule Zero front, way back when I was doing my Rule Zero videos and talking about appropriate ways to effectively use them as a game master and how not to use them as a game master. Yes, you need to be able to manipulate the rules and change them and rewrite them even outside of the scope of what's in the books. The strict rules as written crowd is dead wrong on running games that way if you want to effectively utilize the versatility of tabletop role-playing games. However, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you must have rulings and happenings and whatnot in your world that are within reason for the party and the players to expect. Because even if you can say, oh, metagaming. No, let's say RFID chips do exist in your fictional 1930s. The characters would know that and have that idea because they live in the world. And it would be reasonable for them to at least have some chance of expecting that particular thing. You can't alter what's reasonable and reasonable to be expected in your world in order to gotcha your players and expect them to not feel cheated by it. So let's see what he has to say and see if that's where he's going.
And the player goes, what? How the? Is there an RFID chip wirelessly connected to an alarm system in the year 1933? That makes no sense whatsoever.
Yep. Well, looks like there was some parallel thinking going on there. Bingo.
And if there is a chip, why didn't my character see it when he flipped open the book? And the game master responds, well, your character's from 1933. He doesn't know about RFID chips, so he had no way of knowing it. At this point, the player hurls Mountain Dew in fierce invective against the GM. And the player is right to be angry here because the player's suspension of disbelief has been shattered. His noetic appreciation of the verisimilitude of the world of Cthulhu has been ruined. It is a failure of simulation. There were no RFID chips or wireless alarms in 1933. There is no justification offered for why that expectation is subverted. And the game master has therefore failed to accurately simulate the diegetic world of H.P. Lovecraft stories.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and point this out. And this is, there are people in my life who would say that this is the very epitome of hypocrisy coming from me. Our friend here, the Arbiter of Worlds, has a proclivity for the use of $10 words. In other words, he's using big, long, fancy ways to say things. And I agree with it. I'm a person who values precision in language, and he is technically using a vocabulary that is more precise in relaying what he's saying. But in most cases where he's here and what he's relaying here, he could use much simpler language and more effectively relay his point to his audience, especially because there's going to be a large portion of his audience that is just rolling through their eye, rolling their eyes and truly struggling, and stopping to look words up halfway through the video. But he's correct here, as he talks about the versatility of the word. God, why am I butchering words today? The variable nature, the flexibility, and the versatility of this universe that you're in is damaged, as is, like you said, the suspension of disbelief of feeling like you're in the 1930s Lovecraft it's like an unearned, it's like a jump scare in a horror movie. It's unearned. Sure, you get a reaction out of your audience, but all you're really going to do is piss off the audience if you keep doing it. They're not going to be happy about it. There's no reason, because it's unearned. You're not getting the reaction you're getting is cheap, and therefore everything else that goes with it is cheap. Same thing here. You are shattering something for very little payoff. You're shattering that illusion of that immersion in the game by having this nonsense. And I would even go further than he said. It's like, oh, well, your character doesn't recognize an RFID chip because he wouldn't know what it is. Okay, but I would recognize that there's something in this damn book that looks really funny. I'm a damn Cthulhu character. I'm a Miskatonic academic. I spend a ton of time. I have a library search skill. I spend a ton of time in libraries doing research. And if I see this goofy looking damn chip in the book, at the very least, I'm going to be like, hey, you see something that you don't recognize what it is. It's a strange little, slip, roughly the size of a stamp, little square plastic metal thing that is stuck in the side of the corner of the book. You should know what this thing, you may not know what it is. You may not recognize it as part of some sort of security system, but you should at least recognize that it's something that's not normal or is wildly out of the ordinary. So he's, like I said, he's 100% right on point with that is not the way you can subvert that. And it smacks of the game master just didn't want them to sneak this book out. So he's made sure that that's the only possible solution. And that is railroading. It's kind of funny. You can ensure that the party always ends up at the same, more or less the same location in the more or less the same situation without railroading. And you can have variable outcomes and still be railroading.
And by doing so, he has taken away the player's agency. The player made reasonable choices within a range of possible outcomes, and the GM has unreasonably deprived him of those outcomes. This is bad game mastering. Now, this should not be understood to mean that any type of subversion of a player's beliefs about the game world obliterates player agency. That's not the case at all. In fact, part of exploring a game world is discovering new truths, and often that means being surprised by what you discover. But to sustain agency, that subversion of belief, that surprise, needs to increase rather than decrease the verisimilitude of the world. Let's imagine we're back in the library with the player character and his grimoire. This time, there's no RFID chip, no wireless alarm. However, as the player character approaches the library exit with a stolen grimoire, the grimoire begins to bleed. Its cover, made of desiccated human flesh, erupts in bleeding sores when it touches the body of our hero. The PC's shirt starts to soak with red blood. This presents the PC with a new choice. Does he drop the grimoire and abandon his plan? Does he try to get a large codex to cover up the bloodstain and proceed as planned? Does he feign a medical emergency to escape with a stolen book? All good stuff. Now, what differentiates these two scenarios? Well, an RFID chip is implausible in the world of 1930s Cthulhu tales. An evil grimoire that bleeds when it contacts human flesh is not. One fails as a noetic simulation, and the other succeeds. Now, one might say, well, actually, the difference is that in the first scenario, the PC couldn't do anything about it and got forced into combat automatically, while in the second scenario, the PC still had choices he could make. Okay, that's a good point. So let's change the scenario a bit. Let's imagine we're once again back in the library with the player character and his grimoire. This time, there's no RFID chip and there's no blood. Instead, as the player character exits the library, suddenly the grimoire begins to emit a sorcerous screech, and this book's demonic howling attracts the attention of the security guard, triggering a combat. Now, at this point, this is exactly the same situation as our first scenario, except it's not.
No, it's absolutely not, because this is not something that robs the player of that reasonable expectation. It's a grimoire in a Cthulhu story. It's magical. It has mystic powers. The fact that it can become animate or have some level of sentience is something that could be expected. And instead of it being a result of a cheap trick where the player has no option, no choice, no way to figure things out, no fair play, so to speak, this is something where it's like it could have more research could have possibly found this, and it's believable within the world.
Because part of the diegesis of the Cthulhu mythos is that unpredictable and dangerous magic exists. The player knew his character was stealing a magic grimoire. He could have had his character do some research to see if the grimoire he was stealing was somehow cursed. He might have used a spell to check its properties. A good GM could even have seeded hints to this effect, like the grimoire being titled The Howling Codex and kept stored in a padded soundproof box. But there was no possible way the player could have known to have his character search the book for RFID chips, because those don't exist in the diegesis of Cthulhu. So in order to offer player agency, we must offer a world in which the reality of the diegesis is maintained and where the player's expectations of its reality are sustained. A player cannot make rational choices in pursuit of objectives if the world is not rational. A player cannot make choices about consequences if the world is acausal. Full stop. Simulation of the diegesis is not just valuable for noetic enjoyment. It is necessary to maintain the agency, which is the essence of tabletop RPGs. Now, to be clear,
I'm going to go with this. I don't know why he focuses on using diegesis instead of just saying narrative or plot here. It's actually starting to distract me in this case. And yes, it is technically more accurate. It was a more nuanced term, but he could just easily say the narrative or even the zeitgeist would be a more recognizable term that could get the point across here. Just wanted to say that, and then not to mention it kind of stops me from repeatedly agreeing and then preempting him by saying exactly what he's about to say before he gets a chance to say it.
The prioritization of simulation does not necessarily mean that we need to prioritize mechanical crunch. They are two separate concepts. For instance, a free Kriegspiel of the Battle of Waterloo, refereed by an experienced Prussian officer, will have almost no mechanical crunch, and yet the referee will be singularly devoted to maintaining the verisimilitude of the Kriegspiel simulation. There's no rule in free Kriegspiel that says that Napoleon can't fly across the battlefield on angel wings, but nevertheless, Napoleon will not be allowed to fly across the battlefield on angel wings because there's a game master to prevent it. Now, indeed, part of what makes tabletop RPGs special is that because they have a live game master judging the session, that GM can maintain verisimilitude and thus agency even in circumstances where the rules are iffy or vague.
And we come right back to Rule 0 and the game master's true position within the tabletop role-playing game medium, and you have to be able to make those calls, because the books would be the Encyclopedia Britannica times 2 if somebody tried to make a crunchy system that has a way to resolve just about, even a tenth of the possible decisions a character could make or a player could make for their character. That's why you have to have that. It's literally having the most powerful supercomputer processing and sending unit and the most in-depth and adaptable program in the universe running the game for you. By having that actual human there who can process the information within its context and make those decisions. And it goes back to, to use a big word that that would fit with the theme here. When you look at the zeitgeist of the tabletop role-playing game, that is the holy grail of the game, of the good game master, is maintaining the zeitgeist, which is, for those who don't know, the zeitgeist is essentially the spirit of the era, the spirit of the medium, the feel and tone of whatever it is you're doing. So, for instance, if I'm running a superhero game and I have a superhero feel that I'm going for, and that's my zeitgeist, then yeah, maybe Napoleon flies across the battlefield. If I'm going for realism, if we are putting together a game that is supposed to, like, say you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, a later edition, and you're doing a heroic fantasy, you need to make decisions that operate within the spirit of that heroic fantasy. If you're going to a system that is more about horror or more about realism or more about mystery, you need to make game master decisions that fit within that particular spirit.
This is at the core of the concept of rulings, and this is something no other type of game can do. Conversely, many video games have enormous mechanical crunch, but very little verisimilitude. Think about your typical MMORPG like World of Warcraft. MMORPGs are so crunchy that people spend hours calculating damage over time for various weapons and spells. They write scripts to automate actions and more. And yet when it comes to maintaining the diegesis of the world, MMORPGs fail utterly. It is literally comedic. Like the YouTubers over at Viva La Dirt League with their epic NPC Man show have built an entire channel out of poking fun of how utterly implausible, comedic, and ridiculous MMORPG mechanics are from a point of view of verisimilitude. You've got NPCs who can watch you massacre their friends and then forget about it a few seconds later, vendors who act like they've never met you before, even though you visited their shop every day, monsters with bot-like behaviors that can be exploited. It goes on and on. WoW and its kin are crunchy games, but not at all are they simulations with any verisimilitude. When old school gamers like me blasted Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition for being like an MMORPG, we didn't mean that it was like an MMORPG in being crunchy. We meant it was like an MMORPG in that its mechanical crunch didn't sustain the diegesis of the game world. It's not that there was crunch, it's that the crunch was disassociated from the diegesis. Now, this is an issue about which I am really passionate, and I probably could spend another 2 hours recounting all the ways that violations of a game's diegesis destroys player agency. But I have a Kickstarter to run, so I'm going to stop here. Next week, we'll dive into the distinction between player agency and authorial power and show how story games don't actually offer player agency. And I'll offer some musings on why even the best story games maybe haven't ever been as commercially successful as the major RPGs. Before you head out, please make a critical hit on the like and subscribe buttons and then click over to crowdfunding page.
Okay, so there's some good stuff there. I think he makes a good point there at the very end with 4th edition. The video gamey nature of 4th edition had nothing to do with the level of crunch and the level of mechanical complexity within the rules. It had to do with the restrictions that those mechanical decisions placed on the player. The more, this is the great It's kind of the great trade-off. The more you make your system crunchy, the more you are restricted in how you can use the system, assuming you use all of the rules in the crunchy system, assuming you don't adjust the rules or make it modular. It's a big difference for me between 3.5 and 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons and 4th. 3.5 is modular. You take little pieces here, you take this rule, you take that rule, you take this set of classes, you take this set of feats and abilities, and you put the ones you want. You take some of column A, some of column B, some of column C, put them all together to build a system that's at its core is 3.5 edition Dungeons and Dragons, but you build a system that operates within the world you want to run. And you use the rules that most fit whatever theme you're running. If you try to run 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons with all of the optional stuff, with all of the additional books, with all of the additional rules, what you end up with is this massive hodgepodge that takes forever to slog through and do anything with. And you end up with a massive, just a pile of broken characters. And I mean broken in both ways. Characters that just don't work because this class or this ability is completely ruined by this optional rule over here. It just makes it worthless or makes it not work properly. And also broken as in ridiculously overpowered, because rule A, rule B, rule C, and rule D all on their own are fine and serve their purpose. None of them were ever intended to be used all together. And then when you put them all together, they become this just monster of unstoppable exploitation, like say Pun Pun, where suddenly you have a kobold who is infinitely strong, infinitely dexterous, infinitely has infinite constitution, basically has infinity in all stats. You can go as high as you ever want to. He can never stop. He can have 50 billion strength, 50 billion dex, 50 billion con, so on and so forth. Because of the way he does things, and can basically do it instantly over and over again, from exploiting multiple different optional rules. 4th edition, where it did is 4th edition hamstrung things to a point where, just like an MMORPG, this is where it gets to be video game-like, is you're very restricted in the personalization of your character, how you can make your character unique. It's very, very restricted within the mechanics of the game itself and the mechanics of the way classes are set up, et cetera, et cetera. That makes 4th edition, like he said, antithetical to how tabletop role-playing games really should work, because you don't have the variety, you don't have the versatility that is offered by having a tabletop role-playing game that is run by a human who is adjusting the rules and adjusting the worlds and adjusting the mechanics to fit a particular theme and to enhance the player experience, and who is making those changes and decisions in real time based on all of the complex factors that are specifically influencing what the character is doing in the context of the situation. Now, I'm interested to see the next part where he talks about agency and the failure of story games and how the best story games don't actually fit there. I think I'm going to have a disagreement with him on that one, because it seems like he might lean a little bit more towards the old school mentality of the game is a game is a game, and it's not about storytelling, and it's not, you actually hear that a lot from the OSR when they come out and they just lambast storyteller and narrative, collaborative storytelling game masters. I don't think that's true at all. I think this is another situation where, because there is abuse that happens, or things, because something is very poorly done in a lot of cases, the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater. And the reason a lot of, quote, storytelling games fail as far as popular RPGs goes, because sadly, one of the both the greatest strength and the greatest weakness of the tabletop role-playing game is it's run by a human. And if you have a game master who thinks on his feet, is logical, is fair, does not bring a bias to the table, and can come up with good solutions and good ideas, it works really well. And the fewer restrictions you have on that game master, the better. But if you have game masters who don't actually possess that ability or are too lazy to run the system or to really put effort into it and think about it, or just simply don't have the creativity or the vision to understand the circumstances and make those judgment calls, if you don't have at least some solid structure in the rule system there, they get out of hand real quick. But anyway, what do you guys think? Like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. And I'm really, actually kind of like this one quite a bit. I think there's a lot that I spent most of the video either agreeing with him or accidentally saying exactly what he was about to say before he said it. So we'll see what happens next time we go back to Arbiter of Worlds. See you guys next time.